Part 1. The Scourge of Catalonia. Chapter 1. Poisonous Graffiti. Alina Joanna Limona swerved her lithe young body in and out between the columns like a flickering shadow. Using a crumpled paper bag as a soccer ball, she ducked and dived under the covered walkway, flicking the ball from foot to chest, head or thigh with lightning speed and precision. She made her routine harder every night, challenging the limits of her skill and stamina. Right foot, left foot, chest, head, 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 left thigh, drop it back to the left foot, fake to the right, jerk to the left, flick the ball into the air, and then volley it in between the columns, just out of reach of the fingertips of the imaginary goalkeeper. The crowd in Alina's mind erupted in cheers of joy and began chanting her name all around the stadium. Alina! 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 Without stopping to rest, Alina ran after the ball and continued to practice her moves, working her way up through the empty park until she stood on the esplanade. Only then did she pause to catch her breath in the humid air, to gaze out beyond her beloved city of Barcelona, spread out below her to the Mediterranean Sea beyond. For a few moments, she was no longer a poor girl from the urine-soaked alleyways off La Rambla. She was a 14-year-old princess, surveying her future kingdom. Alina loved this magical and mysterious time of night. The city lights flashed secret messages in the growing dusk. Church spires pierced the night like gigantic exotic plants bursting free of the dirt and grime below, and pushing their shoots towards the sky. Moonbeams danced across the distant water that stretched all the way to Africa. She could make out some distinctive sounds above the general hum of city nightlife: clinking glasses, farting Vespas motor scooters, slamming car doors, and drunken laughter. She inhaled the complex scent of the Barcelona evening, the pungent blossom from tropical plants here in the park, mixed with exhaust fumes and cigarette smoke carried up from the city in the breeze. She could smell sweat and suntan lotion smeared on the park benches by the tourists, the sweet, sickly smell of alcohol from a broken bottle of cheap wine left in the bushes, and the delicious, spicy, greasy aromas of cooking that wafted through the air from the tapas bars. She licked her lips, but only tasted the salt from her own sweat. Alina sighed. She was hungry. To take her mind off it, she concentrated on her inner core. She was strong, brave, dependable, a clear thinker, and a Catalonian. What more did any young woman need? She let the breeze ruffle her long black hair and tickle her cheeks. She had found a secret place where she could squeeze into Park Güell after the tourists and locals were gone, the gates were closed, and the police, La Guardia Urbana, had stopped prowling. Alina loved the quirky offbeat images that the famous architect Antoni Gaudí had created in the park over a century ago. The columns of the cloistered walkways leaned in and curved like tree roots, as if they belonged to the natural world. They looked frivolous and insubstantial, but were deceptively strong. The same thing could be said of Alina herself. Slim and willowy, with olive skin, she moved through the city streets unnoticed. Her honest brown eyes were often downcast or hidden behind her long black hair. She wore the uniform of Barcelona street kids, scuffed up sneakers, baggy capri pants, and a cut-off t-shirt in the blue and red stripes of FC Barcelona, with the number 10 of her hero Gerardino on the back. Just another unremarkable alley kid, unloved and unnoticed. But on the soccer field, all that changed. Alina could move with such grace, change direction so silently and deceptively, that her friends called her Phantasma, the Catalonian word for ghost. Only Alina's closest friends knew to call her that. They didn't share it with adults. It was a badge of honour. As she stood alone on the esplanade, savouring every detail of the moment, there were two things that Alina Joanna Limona did not know right then. The first was that in less than 10 years from now, those skills would help her lead the Spanish women's soccer team to an Olympic gold medal. The second thing that Alina did not know right then was that in less than 10 minutes from now, those skills would save her life. The smells of food from the tapas bars reminded Alina just how hungry she was. But she didn't want to go home just yet. It was noisy and violent at home since her father had left and her uncle Ramon had moved in. Ramon Vasquez spent most of his time being drunk and bossy, shouting orders or complaints to Alina's mother, who cowered on the couch with her head bowed and her hands in her lap. It made Alina furious. That just made her uncle laugh in her face. Ramon wanted Alina to quit school and use her skill to bring in some money by picking the pockets of tourists on the buses that swarmed around La Place de Catalunya all day in the summer. "Lazy, like your father," Ramon would say. "Papa is not lazy. Tell him, Mama." "So why he run away to Madrid, eh?" Ramon taunted. "He didn't run away. Papa is a great sailor, a sea captain. He wouldn't go to Madrid. There's no need for boats in Madrid. Tell him, Mama." Alina's mother said nothing. A tear formed silently on her cheek. Ramon laughed harshly. "Look at the girl, Maria Teresa. She'd be perfect, with her oh so innocent face, the light as a feather touch, that cute little smile of hers, and those big sad eyes. Why, those tourists will want to thank her for robbing them so politely, eh? Except that they won't know that they have been robbed until 5 stops later, when Alina has already left that bus touristique and is robbing another one." But Alina refused. She didn't want to take money from complete strangers, people who might turn out to be nice if you could get to know them. Alina Joanna Limona was not going to be a liar and a cheat like Ramon Vasquez. Alina jogged quietly back down towards the park entrance, enjoying the texture and feel of the curving railings covered in brightly coloured glass and tile. She paused to admire the quirky statues and sculptures that Gaudi had made to amuse the ordinary folk of Catalonia. During the day, crowds of people surrounded and climbed onto the big blue mosaic salamander serpent thing. The image was so popular that the gift shop sold plastic replicas, mugs, plates and neckties with images of the famous blue serpent on them. But at night it stood proud and quiet, all on its own. Alina kept to the shadows and continued past the serpent, down the steps, until she got close to her own personal favourite Gaudi sculpture. Just inside the park gates, waiting to welcome the crowds of visitors, was a mosaic tortoise sitting on top of a large mushroom. The whole structure was only about 3 feet tall, so that even children could pat the back of the tortoise as they walked past. Everyone loved that Gaudi tortoise. It was becoming even more famous and popular than the serpent. Alina slipped in below the shade of a nearby tree, sat on the ground and leaned against the tree trunk to admire the sculpture for a few minutes. The tortoise shell was made of bright blue and yellow pieces of ceramic tile and glass mosaic. A red teardrop hung below one of its noble, proud eyes. The large, ugly mushroom was coloured in drab mosaic pieces of black, brown and grey. On a school outing to the park, a teacher had explained that the tortoise represented the spirit of the Catalonian region, whereas the poisonous mushroom represented the pervasive evil of the world that could not repress the Catalonian spirit. Alina liked to be near the tortoise for a few minutes every evening to gain courage and strength from it before she went home to face Uncle Ramon. The blue back of the tortoise sparkled brightly from a street lamp just outside the locked metal gates of the park. But lying on the ground next to the base of the mushroom stalk, Alina spotted a crude grey rock covered in black graffiti. Alina frowned. That had not been there earlier in the day. It was not part of the sculpture. It was offensive and out of place to see it there. Growing up in Barcelona, Alina was well used to graffiti. Black felt-tip markers and paint daubs were scrawled on any surface that stayed still for even a moment. There were gang slogans and taunting symbols on walls and alleyways, storefronts and sidewalks. All the yellow mailboxes were marked up and tarnished. Vans and cars that parked in quiet side streets got tagged overnight. Even some of the cactus leaves in Park Güell hadn't escaped the attention of the graffiti artists. But here at the park entrance, it was like a scar on the Catalonian spirit. Surely the park staff should have seen it and cleaned it up. Or thrown the rock away, maybe. It looked heavy, about a foot long and 6 inches thick, a big rectangular chunk with strange black symbols scribbled on every surface. But then again, Alina thought, it didn't look all that heavy. She would go right over and pick it up and throw it into the bushes where it would be out of sight and could only offend the earthworms. She liked that. She could imagine old grandfather Earthworm tutting with disapproval when he saw the offensive graffiti-covered rock. But just as Alina was about to get up, march over, and pick up the offensive rock, something very strange happened. The rock began to move, all by itself. It was only very slowly at first. You could hardly even tell. It seemed to slide across the ground until one end of it was right up against the mushroom stem base of the statue. Alina screwed up her eyes to see if there was a rope or wire attached to it, but she couldn't see one. Alina heard a hissing sound, and a small cloud of yellowish-green smoke or steam formed at the base of the sculpture. The graffiti rock began to move steadily round the base of the sculpture, with the hissing cloud forming wherever it touched the base. Alina sat mesmerised, unable to move. She caught a whiff of the smoke, and even though she was 20 yards away, it stung her eyes and made her want to cough. The graffiti rock disappeared behind the statue, then reappeared around the far side of the mushroom stalk and completed its circle. And then it stood up. It was hard to tell in the shadowy half-light, but it looked as though 2 stubby arms emerged from the front of one of the flat surfaces and pushed against the mushroom stalk. To her horror, Alina watched her beloved tortoise, sitting proudly above, begin to shake and shudder as the sculpture slowly tipped over and fell to the ground with a thud. A split appeared at one end of the graffiti rock and formed 2 sturdy legs. The rock walked stiffly to where the tortoise lay on its side, put its hand under the tortoise's shell, and began dragging the entire sculpture towards the park gates a few feet away. The power and strength of this living rock was quite terrifying. Some flashlights appeared through the metal railings, and Alina heard muffled conversations. A van or truck engine started up and began to reverse close to the gates. Alina stared in disbelief at the spot where her beloved statue had once stood. All that remained was a circle of rock at the base, with wisps of yellow-green steam rising from the edges. Disbelief turned to anger in Alina's heart. Someone was stealing the spirit of Catalonia. That rock thing must be a remote control robot or something, controlled by the thieves who were outside the gate in the van. How dare they? She couldn't let them get away with this. The graffiti rock had dragged the sculpture right up to the metal gate. Letting go of the tortoise shell, it began climbing like a gigantic beetle up the gate towards the padlock in the middle. With more hissing, a new cloud of yellow gas formed around the lock. On the other side of the gate, Alina heard the muffled sound of a man yelling, cursing, and jumping up and down. He spoke in English, but with a Catalonian accent, which surprised Alina. "You burned me with acid, you monster!" The padlock fell to the ground, followed, a few seconds later, by the graffiti rock. As it fell, it looked once again like a lifeless rectangular brick, but after hitting the ground with a heavy thump, the legs and arms reappeared. It stood up and began pushing the gates open. Alina could contain herself no longer. She got to her feet and yelled. "Hey, you can't do that! You can't steal the tortoise! Help! Guardia! Police! Help! Help!" The graffiti rock stopped pushing and turned slowly towards where the sounds were coming from. Two pale yellow eyes glared across the darkness, pinning Alina with an evil stare. The creature, for Alina could no longer think of it as just a rock, began to change shape again. The top third of its body grew a little taller and thinner. It seemed a little less stiff, a little more fluid, like soft clay wobbling on a potter's wheel. It began to move directly towards Alina, its cold yellow eyes never leaving her face. The middle part of the creature's body became thicker and seemed to quiver with excitement and anticipation. It seemed in no great hurry, confident and complacent as it moved closer and closer. A rippling wave fluttered up and down its length in a rhythmic pulse that turned Alina's blood cold. When it was about 10 yards in front of her, Alina thought she could see an evil yellow smile forming in the rocky surface below its eyes. It slowly arched its back, threw back its head, and opened its mouth. And then it spat. Alina had seen pictures of rabbits paralysed by fear from the stare of a snake or a weasel. She had seen movies where a giant cobra mesmerises its prey and then spits poison to blind and paralyse it. On pure instinct, Alina had begun to weave to her left before the thick, yellow-green wad of spit left the creature's mouth. The spitball shot through the air with tremendous speed, whistled past Alina's right ear and splattered onto the tree trunk behind her head. The bark exploded in flame as the acid burned a deep scar into the wood. The graffiti rock gave a shriek of disgust. As Alina glanced back at the burning tree, the creature arched its back again. Another yellow spitball arched out into the darkness, followed by another, then another. Alina ducked down low, swerved to her right, faked to go to the left, and then jumped up high. Acid spitballs sizzled through the humid night air, peppering the tree branches and leaves with burning destruction. Alina was getting desperate. The creature kept moving closer, spitting as it went. The toxic spitballs were coming faster and getting closer all the time. Alina crouched down, grabbed a handful of gravel and threw it at the graffiti rock. She kept moving to her right towards the gates, waiting for her chance. When the gravel hit the creature's face, the pale yellow eyes closed for just a moment. It was only for a moment, but that was enough for Alina. In the fraction of a second when the eyes were closed, Alina stopped, changed direction, and sprinted back to her left, up the steps, swerving and ducking as she went. The graffiti rock jerked one way and then the other, desperate to get a clear aim at this irritating and elusive target. It moved after the fleeing girl, but the two crooks at the gate had other ideas. With one at either end of the sculpture, they were lifting the mushroom tortoise into the back of their van. One of them shouted at the graffiti rock, "What the hell are you up to, Desperandum? That kid, she can swerve and bend like a Gerardino free cake, eh? You're never going to hit her now." The other man was not watching Alina flee. He was carefully wrapping a handkerchief around his right forearm. "You managed to hit me though, you... "I'll quit your whining," said the other. "We need to get the statue up to Montserrat before midnight, or Mr. B will be annoyed. If he thinks you delayed things, Ramon, maybe he tell Desperandum to finish the job on you, eh? Come on, Desperandum, get into the van." 100 yards up the stairs, crouched behind a wall, Alina Joanna Limona shivered in fear and watched the evil rock creature clamber into the back of the van before the men closed the doors and drove away. The gates to Park Güell were wide open. A tree near the entrance stood burning and smoking, and all that remained of the Catalonian spirit was a pathetic stump dripping yellow slime onto the gravel. Alina had escaped with her life, but just barely. This had been the most chilling, eventful and bizarre evening of her young life. She was scared. She wanted to tell someone about it. She wanted to be comforted, to try to make sense out of it. Problem was that she couldn't tell anyone. Who on earth would believe her if she described what she had seen tonight? No one.